The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft, muted glow over what used to be an industrial wasteland, now reborn as a hub of modern innovation, art, and cutting-edge science. The buildings that once stood in decay had been transformed into sleek, glass and steel monoliths, symbols of renewal and progress. But this district was more than just a cultural and technological marvel. It was a fortress of discretion, a place where some of the most secretive and powerful meetings in the nation occurred. Tonight was one such night. Inside one of the most secluded of these modern structures, an elite gathering was taking place. Military strategists, scientists, and influential policymakers were deep in conversation, discussing innovations in warfare and the next leap forward in military technology. The urgency of these talks had escalated over recent months as international tensions grew. The stakes were high, and decisions made tonight would influence the future defense of the country. Among the attendees was Tara Collins, a woman in her late 20s, her composed demeanor hiding a sharp mind and an acute sense of responsibility. Tara wasn't here for small talk or casual networking. Her purpose tonight was critical. She had been entrusted by her father, Colonel Anthony Collins, a decorated military strategist, to deliver highly classified documents. The contents were tied to research on psychological warfare and cutting-edge military strategies research that could change the dynamics of future conflicts. Tara's role as an analyst had earned her the trust of a select few, but despite her importance, her presence tonight was meant to remain unnoticed. She was not on the guest list, and very few knew the weight of her mission. As she walked through the grand lobby, her gaze passed over high-ranking officers, defense contractors, and carefully dressed civilians locked in intense discussions. Each figure in this room had their own agenda, their own stakes. Tara moved with ease, her steps measured and confident, her task always in the back of her mind. But beneath the surface, she felt a quiet tension, a need to keep her head down and avoid any unnecessary attention. The importance of her mission bore down on her, a weight that made each step feel heavier. And yet someone had already noticed her. Steve Martinez, a mid-level security officer, had been stationed here for the past several weeks. He was no ordinary guard. Martinez was someone with a past shaped by frustration and a burning desire for recognition. His career in law enforcement had stalled years ago, and bitterness had grown in him ever since. Watching the elite circle of power that passed through these halls day after day only deepened his resentment. Men and women who he considered entitled and unworthy moved freely in spaces he could only guard. But Martinez was an observer by nature, trained to notice details others might miss. When he spotted Tara's name on the internal guest list, something in his memory stirred. He couldn't quite place her at first, but there was something about the way she moved, the way she seemed to blend in too well, that triggered his instincts. She didn't fit the profile of a typical attendee. The more he watched her, the more he became convinced she had another purpose, something secret. He wasn't sure what it was, but Martinez couldn't shake the idea that she wasn't just another guest. Driven by a quiet but persistent paranoia, Martinez decided to follow her. His steps were measured, keeping just enough distance to remain unseen. He knew this building better than anyone, the hidden corridors, the places long forgotten during its transformation from factory to fortress. He moved through the shadows, watching as she made her way down a quiet hallway, one that led to the more restricted areas of the building. For Martinez, this was the moment he had been waiting for. His mind spun with the possibilities: espionage, sabotage, maybe something even worse. He was determined to find out. Tara, meanwhile, was focused solely on her task. She clutched the documents, knowing that her next move was to meet with a trusted military analyst in one of the private rooms, a place where they could discuss the material without interruption. Everything had been meticulously planned, but a growing sense of unease was building inside her. Despite all the careful preparation, something felt off. As she reached the door to the private room, she hesitated for just a second, her instincts sharpening. The air around her seemed still, too quiet. She scanned the hallway behind her but saw nothing out of place. Brushing off the feeling, Tara reached for the door handle. Before she could touch it, a hand clamped firmly around her arm. Startled, Tara spun around to see the intense, watchful face of Steve Martinez, his eyes locked onto hers. "Who the hell are you? And what do you think you're doing?" Martinez's voice was low, but the authority in his tone left no room for misunderstanding. His grip tightened around her arm, cold and unyielding. Tara's heart jumped for a moment, but she quickly steadied herself. This wasn't the first time she had faced hostility, though this felt more personal. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said evenly, attempting to pull her arm free. But Martinez's grip didn't waver. "Don't play games," Martinez snapped, his voice seething with quiet aggression. "You think you can just walk in here with your connections and do whatever you want? I've seen it before, but not this time." Tara's pulse quickened. She had encountered men like him in the past, men who carried their insecurities like a weapon, looking for a reason to assert dominance. But Martinez was different. His anger was palpable, his suspicion burning with a zeal she hadn't expected. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but you're overstepping," Tara said, keeping her voice calm despite the tension rising between them. She needed to find a way out of this situation before it escalated. Martinez's lip curled into a sneer. "The only mistake is letting people like you get this far unchecked. You've got secrets, and I'm going to find out what they are." Without warning, he shoved her against the wall. The impact knocked the air from her lungs for a split second, the cold concrete pressing against her back as his hand remained locked around her arm. The hallway was dimly lit, and the sounds of the event were distant, leaving them completely isolated. Tara's face betrayed no pain as she looked directly into his eyes, keeping her voice steady. "You're crossing a line," she warned, her tone sharp but controlled. Martinez's eyes flickered with something dark, something beyond simple suspicion. "I'm doing what should have been done the moment you walked in here. You won't get away with whatever it is you're planning." The cold, abrasive surface of the wall pressed into Tara's back as Martinez's grip tightened on her arm. His face was disturbingly close, his eyes darting with unhinged suspicion. Tara's training had prepared her to remain calm in high-pressure situations like this, and right now that calm was her only shield. But the aggression radiating from Martinez, coupled with the growing physical discomfort, was starting to wear her down. She knew that one wrong move could escalate this confrontation beyond control. "Who do you think you are?" Martinez growled, his voice low, his breath hot with rage. "You think you can just walk in here, drop your name, and everything magically falls into place? I know your type. People like you slip through the cracks, always getting away with things the rest of us would be torn apart for." Tara held his gaze, refusing to show fear, though her pulse quickened with every passing second. This wasn't just an overzealous security officer making a scene. Martinez's behavior was deeply personal, his words dripping with bitterness. He wasn't simply doing his job, he was projecting something far darker onto her. His anger had roots, and they were driving this confrontation to a dangerous edge. "I'm here for legitimate reasons," Tara said carefully, her voice even and calm. "I have authorization to attend this event. If you're unsure, we can verify it with your superiors. Martinez sneered, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Superiors, he spat out the word with disdain. You really think they care about me? You think they listen to what I have to say? No, they'll sweep everything under the rug, like they always do. But not this time. Tara could sense that Martinez wasn't just angry, he was desperate. He wasn't a man doing his duty, he was a man looking for a reckoning. And he had decided she was part of the problem. She needed to find out why before he made a decision he couldn't take back. Before Tara could respond, Martinez yanked her roughly from the wall, propelling her down the corridor toward a set of old, unused doors. This part of the building had been left untouched, remnants from the structure's former life as a factory. The rooms here had been repurposed for storage, their original functions forgotten. As Martinez dragged her forward, Tara's mind raced. What was his plan? Was he acting on impulse, or was there something larger behind his actions? Let's see how those fancy connections help you now, Martinez muttered, pulling her toward the heavy metal door. The further they moved from the event, the quieter the building became. The hum of distant conversation faded, replaced by the echo of their footsteps in the cold, desolate corridor. Martinez slammed the door shut behind them, locking it with a sharp click. The room they entered was dimly lit, the air stale. Crates and boxes lined the walls, relics of a past era. There were no windows, and the only exit was the door they had come through. It was a dead end. Martinez finally released her, shoving her forward with enough force to make her stumble. Tara caught herself on the edge of a crate, quickly scanning the room. She had to think fast. There was no way out, and Martinez had the upper hand for now. All right. Enough with the games, Martinez snarled. You're going to tell me exactly what you're doing here and who you're working for. I don't believe that authorized guest crap for a second. You've been acting off since you walked in. Tara took a slow breath, steadying herself. She needed to keep him talking, to learn more about what was driving this dangerous outburst. It was clear now that Martinez wasn't just an angry guard, he was caught up in something bigger. But what? And why had he latched onto her? I'm telling you the truth, Tara said, her voice remaining calm despite the growing tension. I'm here on behalf of my father, Colonel Anthony Collins. I'm delivering documents related to a defense project. There's nothing more to it. Martinez's eyes narrowed, his face twisting in a scowl. You think I'm stupid? You expect me to believe that you're just here to drop off papers? No, you're more than that. I've been watching you, you're too cautious, too calculated. You know things, don't you? Tara's heart sank slightly. He wasn't going to listen to reason. But perhaps she could exploit his paranoia. She needed to make him question his own suspicions.
You're right, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. I do know things. More than you could imagine. But I'm not the threat here. If you really want answers, you should be asking yourself why someone like me would be here in the first place. Why would I risk coming here with sensitive documents? Knowing the protocols in place. Do you really think I'd show up without backup?
For a brief moment, she saw uncertainty flash in his eyes. He hesitated, just for a second, but then shook his head, unwilling to be swayed by logic. Nice try. But I'm not falling for it. I've seen your kind before, always trying to turn the tables, always trying to manipulate the situation. But not this time. Tara didn't back down. You're smarter than that, Martinez. You've been in this game long enough to know when something doesn't add up. You're right. I'm not just a messenger. But if you think I'm here to sabotage anything, you're wrong. The real threat isn't me. Martinez stepped closer, his face inches from hers, his voice lowering to a menacing growl. Then who is it? Who are you protecting? Tara met his gaze steadily. She had to be careful with how much she revealed. He was teetering on the edge, and one wrong move could push him too far. "I'm not protecting anyone," she said firmly. "But I've seen things tonight that make me question a lot of what's going on here. Things that go beyond simple security." His expression darkened further. "You're lying." "I'm not," Tara replied. "Think about it. Why are you really here, Martinez? Do you think it's a coincidence that someone like you, someone who feels overlooked, undervalued, ends up working in a place like this? A place where power shifts hands behind closed doors? Do you really think you're just here to stand guard? Or is there something bigger happening that you haven't been told about?" Martinez hesitated, doubt creeping into his features. She could see the struggle in his eyes, the wheels turning in his mind. He had his suspicions, but he wasn't in control of this situation either. Whatever he thought was going on, he was starting to realize he might be a pawn in a game much larger than he had imagined. Tara pressed forward, sensing his internal conflict. "I know more than you think," she said quietly, taking advantage of his uncertainty. "And if you want to survive this, you need to start asking the right questions. Because if you're not careful, you'll end up on the wrong side of this." Martinez clenched his jaw, his grip on his gun tightening as he wrestled with his thoughts. But before he could respond, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the room. Someone was coming. Tara's heart raced as she heard the footsteps echo in the hallway outside the darkened room. They were faint but unmistakable, slow and deliberate, as if someone was taking their time approaching. She wasn't sure if this was a good sign or a bad one, but one thing was certain: her window for maneuvering was closing fast. She couldn't predict how Martinez would react if someone entered the room and found them in this compromising situation. If the wrong person appeared, this whole delicate balance could shatter.
Martinez's eyes flickered toward the door, and for the first time since he'd confronted her, Tara saw the first glimmer of doubt flash across his face. He was weighing his options, calculating whether this was someone coming to back him up or if his actions were about to be exposed. Tara could see the conflict written in his tense posture, the subtle shift in his expression.
Before he could act on whatever conclusions he was coming to, Tara made her move. She needed to turn the situation in her favor, and fast. Her mind raced, searching for the best way to exploit the thin cracks of uncertainty in his demeanor. She knew that if she didn't, the next few moments could spiral completely out of her control. "Martinez," Tara began, keeping her voice low and calm, "you don't know who that is, do you?" His eyes snapped back to her, narrowing in suspicion. "What are you talking about?" "Whoever's coming," she continued, "they're not coming to help you. You've been out here too long, away from the main event. They're going to start asking questions. And when they do, what do you think they'll say when they see how far this has gone?" Martinez's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. The footsteps were growing louder, closing in, each step echoing through the hallway like the ticking of a bomb. He was clearly trying to think through the situation, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He didn't know who was coming, and the uncertainty was gnawing at him. "I know you don't trust me," Tara said, pressing her advantage, "but right now, I'm your best option. You've gone too far to turn back now, but if we both play this right, we can still come out of this without everything falling apart. We can make it look like nothing happened. You can still salvage this." Martinez sneered at her, his face twisting with frustration. "You think I'm just going to let you walk out of here? After all of this?" "No," Tara said quickly. "I'm not asking you to let me go. I'm offering you a way out of this. You said it yourself, you know how these games are played. But I'm playing the same game, and right now we both have something to lose." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Tara could feel the tension between her and Martinez, a volatile mix of suspicion, resentment, and desperation. She could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't trust her, but he also wasn't sure what his next move should be. His hand twitched toward his gun again, as if it were a lifeline, the one thing that could keep him in control of the situation. But just as he seemed ready to make a decision, the door creaked open. Tara held her breath, bracing herself for what was coming. She expected to see another guard, someone from Martinez's team, or perhaps one of the military personnel from the event who had noticed her absence. But instead, a figure stepped into the doorway, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. It was Caleb Dawson, a former colleague of her father and a man who had known Tara since she was a child. He had retired from active duty years ago, but remained deeply connected to the military and intelligence circles. His presence here was no coincidence. Caleb had a knack for showing up exactly when he was needed or exactly when things were about to go wrong. Martinez stiffened immediately, his eyes widening as he recognized Caleb. It was clear that this wasn't someone Martinez expected to see, and his shock was palpable. He took a step back, instinctively retreating as if Caleb's mere presence had upended his plans. Tara felt a surge of relief wash over her, though she knew the situation was still precarious. Caleb's arrival wasn't going to automatically save her, but it gave her a fighting chance. Caleb stepped into the room, his gaze quickly scanning the situation, assessing the tension between Tara and Martinez. His expression was calm, but there was an undeniable edge in his voice as he spoke. Steve, Caleb said slowly, his tone neutral but laced with authority. "What's going on here?" Martinez swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. "This isn't what it looks like," he blurted out. "I thought she was up to something. She went into the restricted area. I had to stop her." Caleb raised an eyebrow, his eyes flicking to Tara, who remained motionless, her expression guarded. He could tell that there was more to the story than what Martinez was saying, but he wasn't about to show his hand just yet. "Tara," Caleb said, his voice softening slightly, "are you all right?" Tara nodded, though her body still ached from the impact against the wall. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. "But this situation isn't what you think." Caleb's gaze shifted back to Martinez, who was growing more agitated by the second. It was clear that Martinez was struggling to keep control of the narrative, and the presence of someone as seasoned and respected as Caleb was throwing him off balance. "Steve," Caleb said again, his voice measured, "I need you to calm down. Whatever you think is happening here, we can talk about it. But this," he gestured to the tense standoff between Martinez and Tara, "isn't the way to handle it." Martinez's face flushed with anger. "You don't understand, Caleb. She's hiding something. I know she is. You can't trust her. You don't know what she's really doing here." Caleb's expression remained unreadable as he took a step closer to Martinez. "I don't think you know what's going on either, Steve. But I do know one thing: this isn't the time or place for accusations, especially not like this." Martinez's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his breathing ragged. Tara could see the conflict raging within him, the frustration of being outmatched by someone like Caleb, someone who carried more authority and respect than he ever could. It was clear that Martinez's pride was wounded, and his desperation to prove himself was driving him further into reckless decisions. "I'm not letting her go," Martinez said through gritted teeth. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this." Caleb sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Steve, you're making a mistake. Whatever you think she's involved in, you need to step back and let me handle it." But Martinez wasn't listening. His paranoia had consumed him. and he was too far gone to see reason. With a sudden burst of energy, he lunged forward, grabbing Tara's arm again and yanking her toward him. Tara gasped as the force of his grip sent a fresh wave of pain shooting through her arm. Steve Caleb shouted, his voice finally breaking through the calm facade. "Let her go." But Martinez wasn't about to give up control now. He pulled Tara closer, his breath hot on her neck as he hissed in her ear. "You think you can outsmart me? You think I'm just going to let you walk out of here after everything?" Tara's mind raced, searching for a way out. Caleb was just feet away, but Martinez had the upper hand, and the look in his eyes was growing more dangerous by the second. Steve Caleb said again, his voice low and dangerous, "You don't want to do this. Let her go now." For a moment it seemed like Martinez might listen, his grip on Tara loosening slightly. But then something snapped. Maybe it was the pressure of the situation. Maybe it was his own sense of failure. Whatever it was, Martinez's face twisted into a mask of rage, and before anyone could react, he shoved Tara hard against the wall once more, the impact reverberating through her body. This time the pain was sharp and immediate, and Tara struggled to stay on her feet, her vision swimming for a moment from the force of the blow. Caleb's expression darkened. In an instant, he was in motion, crossing the distance between them with the speed and precision of a trained soldier. Before Martinez could even react, Caleb had him in a hold, his arm twisted painfully behind his back. "Enough," Caleb said, his voice cold and commanding. "This is over." Martinez struggled for a moment, his face contorting with pain and frustration, but he couldn't break free. Caleb was stronger, faster, and more experienced. The fight was over before it had even begun. Tara leaned against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself. The room was spinning, but she forced herself to stay upright. She couldn't afford to show weakness now. As Caleb secured Martinez, pulling him away from her, Tara could see the realization dawning on Martinez's face, the understanding that he had lost. His plan, whatever it had been, was falling apart around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Caleb glanced over at Tara, his expression softening slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked again, his voice gentler this time. Tara nodded, though she still felt the dull ache from the collision with the wall. "I'll be fine," she said, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. She wasn't fine. None of this was fine. Martinez, still restrained by Caleb, spat out a curse, his face twisted with fury. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who you're dealing with." Caleb ignored him, his attention focused on Tara. "We need to get you out of here," he said quietly. "There's more going on than you realize." Tara's mind spun with questions, but she couldn't think clearly enough to voice them. She could only nod as Caleb began leading her toward the door, leaving Martinez restrained and defeated behind them. As they stepped into the hallway, the sounds of the main event still faintly audible in the distance, Tara couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The hallway felt like a narrow tunnel, its sterile lighting and stark white walls amplifying the sense of urgency Tara felt as Caleb guided her away from the scene. Every step they took seemed to echo loudly in the quiet space, and though they were moving quickly, Tara couldn't shake the lingering discomfort in her body. Her head still pounded from being slammed into the wall, and a dull ache radiated through her ribs. But more than that, her mind was racing, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. Whoever Steve Martinez thought he was, there was clearly something deeper driving him, something beyond a simple abuse of power or personal vendetta. He had hinted at a larger plot, at secrets that even she wasn't aware of. And though Caleb had stepped in to defuse the immediate situation, Tara knew that they had only scratched the surface of whatever was happening here tonight. As they made their way through the winding corridors of the old building, Caleb kept a tight hold on her arm, not letting her lag behind. His demeanor had shifted since the confrontation with Martinez. He was more focused, more serious, as if the stakes had suddenly become much higher than either of them had anticipated. Tara had known Caleb for most of her life. He had been a close friend of her father, a mentor of sorts. But now there was a guardedness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, as though he were carrying the weight of a secret too dangerous to share. "Caleb," Tara began, her voice slightly breathless from the pace they were keeping. "What was all of that back there? Martinez, he wasn't acting alone, was he?" Caleb glanced at her, his expression tight. "No, he wasn't. But we can't talk about it here." "Then where are we going?" Tara pressed, her mind whirling with possibilities. "Because whatever's going on, I need to know. My father." "Your father knows," Caleb interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "He's the one who sent me to keep an eye on you tonight. There's more at stake here than you realize, Tara. Martinez is just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle." Tara's heart sank at the mention of her father. If he knew about this, if he had known all along, then why hadn't he told her? Why had he sent her here with no information, no warning? She felt a wave of frustration rising inside her, but she swallowed it down. Now wasn't the time for questions. She needed to trust Caleb, at least for the moment. As they rounded a corner, Caleb slowed down, finally coming to a stop near a small, unmarked door at the end of the hallway. He pressed his hand to an almost invisible panel beside the door, and with a quiet hiss, it slid open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into the bowels of the building. The air grew cooler as they descended, the faint sound of machinery humming in the distance. "What is this place?" Tara asked, her voice hushed as they reached the bottom of the stairs. Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led her through a series of dimly lit passages, each one more remote than the last. Tara's instincts prickled. She had spent enough time in military facilities to recognize a secure, off-the-grid section when she saw one. This was no ordinary basement or storage area. They were heading into restricted territory somewhere even Martinez likely hadn't been aware of. Finally, they reached a heavy steel door, and Caleb paused, his hand resting on the handle. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "What I'm about to show you," he said quietly, "is something you weren't supposed to see. Not yet, anyway. But given what just happened with Martinez, I think it's time you understood what's really going on." Tara felt a knot form in her stomach. She had always known that there were layers to the military's operations, layers that even someone like her father didn't always have full access to. But the way Caleb was speaking now, it was as if they were on the edge of something truly dangerous, something that could change everything she thought she knew. Caleb pushed open the door and Tara stepped inside. The room beyond was starkly different from the rest of the building. It was larger than she had expected, with high ceilings and walls lined with advanced technological equipment. At the center of the room was a sleek, circular table surrounded by monitors displaying streams of data, tactical maps, and surveillance feeds. Several people, military personnel and civilians alike, were seated at the table, deep in discussion. They looked up as Caleb entered, their expressions a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Tara Collins," Caleb announced, gesturing toward her as they entered. "She's with us now." There was a moment of silence as the others in the room exchanged glances. Then a man with graying hair and a severe expression stood up, fixing Tara with a hard stare. "We weren't expecting her," he said flatly. Colonel Collins didn't mention that she'd be involved. She wasn't supposed to be, Caleb replied, his voice steady. But things have changed. Martinez's actions were a warning sign. Whatever we thought was under control isn't anymore. Tara felt the weight of their gazes on her, but she kept her posture straight, refusing to be intimidated. Someone needs to explain what's going on, she said firmly, her eyes locking with the man who had spoken. Because if my father knew about this, I deserve to know too. The man, General Victor Hayes, as Tara recognized him now, hesitated for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered her words. Then he sighed and motioned for her to sit. "All right," Hayes said, his voice gruff. "You want to know what's going on? Fine. But understand this, once you're in, there's no going back." Tara sat down, her mind racing. She had a feeling that whatever was about to be revealed would change everything. Hayes began to explain. "For the past several months, we've been tracking a group that's been operating in the shadows of our military and intelligence networks," he said, his tone serious. "They're highly organized, well-funded, and they've managed to stay off the radar until recently. We don't know exactly who they're working for, but they've been targeting classified defense projects, particularly those related to psychological warfare and next-generation military technology." Tara's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly the kind of work her father had been involved in, the kind of research that was so sensitive, even she hadn't been given full access to it. "We believe they've already compromised several high-level officials," Hayes continued, "people we thought were loyal. But the deeper we've dug, the more we've realized just how extensive this operation is. It's not just about stealing information. They're planning something much bigger, something that could destabilize our entire defense infrastructure." Tara's mind raced, trying to process everything she was hearing. This wasn't just about Martinez's paranoia or a rogue security officer overstepping his bounds. This was a full-scale infiltration, and she had stumbled right into the middle of it. "And Martinez?" Tara asked, her voice steady but urgent. "Where does he fit into all of this?" Caleb stepped forward, his expression grim. "Martinez is part of a cell within the organization. He's not one of the key players, but he's been working as an informant, feeding them intel from within our security ranks. He's been trying to gather information on tonight's meeting specifically, who's involved, and what projects are being discussed. When he saw you, he must have thought you were a threat to his operation." Tara's stomach churned. Martinez had been working for them all along, and his actions tonight had nearly blown the entire operation wide open. If Caleb hadn't intervened when he did, who knew what would have happened? "We've been watching him for weeks," Hayes added, "waiting for him to slip up, to give us something we could use. But tonight, he acted out of desperation. He must have thought you were getting too close to something he didn't want you to see." Tara clenched her fists in her lap, her mind racing. "Why didn't anyone warn me?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Why didn't my father tell me what was going on?" "Because it was too dangerous," Caleb said quietly. "Your father didn't want to put you at risk. He thought keeping you in the dark would protect you." But now he paused, glancing at Hayes before continuing. "Now there's no turning back. You're involved, whether we like it or not." Tara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had always known that her father's work was dangerous, that there were things he couldn't tell her. But this was something else entirely, and now she was caught in the middle of it. "So what happens next?" she asked, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at the edges of her mind. Hayes leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Now we take the fight to them. We've identified several key targets within the organization, and we're planning a series of operations to dismantle their network. But we need to move fast. They're getting bolder. and if we don't act soon, they'll be in a position to do some real damage. Tara nodded, her resolve hardening. She didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear: she couldn't afford to stay on the sidelines anymore. If this organization was as dangerous as Hayes and Caleb believed, then she had to be a part of stopping it for her father's sake and for everything he had worked to protect. "I'm in," Tara said, her voice steady. "Whatever it takes, I'm in." Caleb's gaze softened slightly, and he nodded. "I knew you would be." But as the room buzzed with quiet discussion, Tara couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning and that the deeper they went, the more dangerous things would become. The room buzzed with energy as the team's conversation shifted into high gear. Tactical discussions, rapid-fire exchanges of intel, and real-time updates from surveillance feeds dominated the space. Tara sat quietly for a moment, processing the overwhelming cascade of new information. She had agreed to dive in, to take a role in dismantling this dangerous conspiracy, but the weight of it was settling heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just an observer anymore, she was part of this now, and the reality of what that meant was starting to sink in. Caleb stood next to her, his arms crossed as he listened to General Hayes lay out the next steps. The plan was intense and multifaceted. They were preparing to launch a series of coordinated strikes against multiple cells within the organization. Martinez, though small time in the larger scheme, had provided enough of a crack in the enemy's defenses to allow them to get a clearer picture of who they were really up against. The operation would involve precision, stealth, and calculated force. There was no room for error. Hayes paused mid-sentence and turned his attention back to Tara, his gaze sharp and discerning. "You're sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. "Because once we start moving, there's no turning back. You're in for good." Tara straightened in her chair, pushing aside any lingering doubts. Her father had trusted her enough to bring her into this world, to give her a glimpse of the stakes involved. She wouldn't let him down. She wouldn't let any of them down. "I'm ready," she said firmly, meeting Hayes's gaze with unflinching determination. "Just tell me what I need to do." Hayes gave a curt nod and turned back to the team, gesturing toward one of the screens that displayed a map of several critical locations. "We've identified 3 primary targets," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a seasoned commander. "These are high-value nodes in the organization's communications and logistics network. If we can take them out, we'll cripple their ability to coordinate and operate effectively." Tara leaned forward, studying the map. Each target was strategically placed, nestled within the infrastructure of major cities, hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy, legal loopholes, and false identities. The organization had embedded itself so deeply into the system that extracting them would be like trying to remove a tumor without damaging the vital organs surrounding it. Hayes pointed to the first location, a seemingly innocuous office building in downtown Chicago. "This is their nerve center," he explained. "All communications between the cells funnel through here. If we can sever their lines of communication, we can isolate each cell and deal with them individually. But this place is heavily fortified. We'll need a tactical team to breach the building and secure the data before they can wipe it." Caleb stepped closer, narrowing his eyes at the map. "We'll need someone on the inside for this one. Someone who can move quickly and quietly, retrieve the data, and get out before they realize what's happening." Tara's heart raced as she realized where this was going. She had already been on the periphery of this conspiracy. She was the perfect candidate to infiltrate their ranks without raising too many alarms. She wasn't a soldier, but her father had trained her well, and her background in military analysis had given her a set of skills most wouldn't expect from someone in her position. "You want me to go in?" Tara said, more a statement than a question. Hayes glanced at Caleb, who gave a subtle nod, before turning back to her. "You're our best option," Hayes said. "They know who you are, but they don't know what you're capable of. If we can play this right, they'll never see it coming." Tara swallowed hard, her mind spinning with the implications of what was being asked of her. This wasn't just about sitting behind a desk and analyzing data anymore. This was about putting herself directly in the line of fire, walking into the lion's den with no guarantee of coming out unscathed. But she had already committed. There was no backing out now. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Hayes wasted no time, launching into a detailed explanation of the operation. The team would provide tactical support from a remote location, monitoring the situation through surveillance and encrypted comms. Caleb would lead the ground team, ready to extract her once the mission was complete. Tara's role would be to pose as a consultant, someone brought in to assist with logistical issues at the office. Her cover story would be airtight, thanks to her father's connections, and with Martinez out of the picture, the enemy would be scrambling to find someone to fill his shoes. That was their opening. As the briefing continued, Tara felt a strange mix of fear and excitement building inside her. This was dangerous, no doubt about it, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to prove to herself and to everyone around her that she could handle the pressure, that she was more than just the daughter of a decorated military officer. She could make a difference. Once the plan was finalized, the team dispersed to make their final preparations. Caleb pulled Tara aside as the others filed out of the room, his expression serious. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice laced with concern. "I know you're capable, but this is a high-risk operation. If anything goes wrong..." "I know the risks," Tara interrupted, her voice firm. "But I'm not backing down. This is bigger than just me. It's bigger than all of us." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "All right," he said, his voice softening. "Just be careful. Don't try to be a hero. Get in, get the data, and get out. We'll be right behind you." Tara nodded, grateful for his support, but also resolute in her decision. She wasn't looking for glory or recognition. She was here to finish what her father had started, to stop the people who threatened everything they had worked to protect. The night was thick with tension as Tara stood outside the towering office building in downtown Chicago, her heart pounding in her chest. The city's lights flickered around her, the hum of traffic a constant backdrop as she took a deep breath and prepared to step into the unknown. Dressed in a sleek, professional outfit that matched her cover story, Tara looked every bit the part of a logistics consultant. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was a whirlwind of nerves and determination. She had spent the past few hours mentally rehearsing her role, preparing for every possible scenario, but there was no way to predict exactly how things would unfold once she was inside. Her earpiece crackled to life, and Caleb's voice came through, steady and reassuring. "We're in position," he said. "You've got a clear window. Head inside and stick to the plan. We'll be monitoring everything from here." Tara gave a small nod, even though Caleb couldn't see her. "Copy that," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She straightened her shoulders and walked confidently toward the entrance, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. As she entered the building, the sleek, modern lobby greeted her with its polished floors and minimalist decor. A receptionist sat behind a glossy desk, and Tara gave her a polite smile as she approached. "Good evening," Tara said smoothly, handing over the credentials the team had forged for her. I'm here for a consultation meeting. Logistics assessment. The receptionist scanned her ID, her eyes flicking briefly to the screen before nodding. You're all set. They're expecting you on the 15th floor. Tara thanked her and made her way to the elevator, her heart pounding harder with each passing second. Once inside the elevator, she pressed the button for the 15th floor and watched the numbers climb, her mind racing with the details of the mission. She had to stay focused. One mistake, one wrong move, and everything could fall apart. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, and Tara stepped out into the quiet hallway. The 15th floor was eerily empty, the kind of sterile office environment that felt impersonal and cold. She walked toward the office suite where her meeting was supposed to take place, her eyes scanning her surroundings for any sign of trouble. As she approached the glass doors of the office, a man in a suit greeted her with a nod. "Ms. Collins," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. We're looking forward to your input on the logistics situation." Tara shook his hand, her smile professional but guarded. "Of course. I'm happy to help," she replied, slipping seamlessly into her role. The man, a mid-level executive by the looks of him, led her into a conference room, where a few other individuals were seated around a table, waiting for the meeting to begin. They were all in on the organization's operations, but they didn't suspect her yet. They believed she was just another cog in the machine. As the meeting began, Tara did her best to play the part, asking relevant questions about the company's logistics issues, nodding along as they explained their challenges. But beneath the surface, her mind was laser-focused on the real mission. She needed to access their internal network, retrieve the data they were hiding, and get out before anyone realized what was happening. The opportunity came when one of the men excused himself to take a phone call, leaving his laptop unattended on the table. Tara's heart raced as she seized the moment. While the others were distracted, she discreetly slid the laptop toward her, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the hidden files Caleb had instructed her to find. The seconds ticked by like hours as Tara worked, her pulse pounding in her ears. She could feel the weight of the operation bearing down on her, the knowledge that everything hinged on this moment. If she was caught, it wouldn't just be her life on the line, the entire mission could be compromised. Finally, the data transfer completed, and Tara quickly closed the laptop, sliding it back into place just as the man returned to the room. She forced herself to remain calm, her expression neutral as the meeting continued. But inside, she was already planning her escape. Caleb's voice crackled in her earpiece again, barely audible over the sound of her own racing thoughts. "You've got the data," he said. "Now get out of there. Don't raise any alarms." Tara stood up, offering a polite smile to the group as the meeting came to an end. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "I'll have my recommendations ready by the end of the week." As she walked back toward the elevator, her heart pounded harder with every step. She had done it. She had the data. But now came the most dangerous part, getting out before they realized what she had taken. The elevator doors slid open, and Tara stepped inside, her breath catching in her throat as she pressed the button for the lobby. The descent felt agonizingly slow, every second stretching into an eternity. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, that at any moment the doors would open and she would be met with armed guards ready to take her down. But when the elevator reached the lobby, everything was quiet. The receptionist gave her a polite nod as she passed, and Tara walked out of the building with calm, measured steps. She didn't let herself breathe until she was outside, the cool night air hitting her like a wave of relief. I'm out, Tara whispered into her earpiece as she made her way toward the rendezvous point. I've got the data. Copy that, Caleb replied, his voice filled with relief. We'll pick you up in 2 minutes. Stay low. Tara ducked into a nearby alley, her heart still racing from the adrenaline. She had done it. But even as the team's car pulled up to take her to safety, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the organization would retaliate, and when they did, the stakes would be higher than ever. The dark alley felt suffocating as Tara crouched in the shadows, waiting for Caleb and the extraction team to pick her up. Her mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened in the past hour. She had successfully retrieved the data, but the tension of the mission still coiled tightly in her chest. Every muscle in her body remained on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Through her earpiece, Caleb's voice came through again, low and urgent. Tara, stay sharp. We're almost there. Tara nodded even though he couldn't see her, her hand clutching the small drive she had transferred the data onto. The intel inside could bring down a major part of the conspiracy: their communications, logistics, the names of key players. It was everything they needed to deal a crippling blow to the organization, but that only made her a bigger target now. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires cut through the silence of the night. A sleek black SUV rounded the corner and came to a sudden stop in front of her. Caleb jumped out of the passenger side, his expression a mixture of relief and urgency as he motioned for her to get in. "Come on, let's go," he called out. Tara didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the vehicle, her heart pounding in her ears, and dove into the back seat. The moment she was inside, the SUV roared back to life, speeding down the narrow streets of downtown Chicago. Caleb slid back into the passenger seat, while the driver, one of the team's operatives, kept his eyes focused on the road, navigating through the maze of city streets. Tara sat back, her breath finally starting to slow as she clutched the drive in her hand. The mission was over, and they had what they needed. But something still gnawed at her gut, a lingering feeling that it wasn't truly over yet. Caleb turned in his seat to face her, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of injury. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Tara nodded, her throat dry. "I'm fine, but we need to go through the data as soon as possible. If what's in here is as big as we think, they'll come after us fast." Caleb's face darkened. "You're right. We're not out of the woods yet. As soon as we get back to the base, we'll start decrypting the files." The SUV sped through the night, the city lights flickering past as they headed toward their secure location. Tara tried to relax, but the adrenaline still coursing through her veins kept her senses on high alert. Something wasn't right. It was too quiet, too easy. Suddenly, the driver cursed under his breath, his hands tightening on the wheel as he glanced at the rearview mirror. Tara's stomach dropped. She twisted in her seat, looking out the back window, and saw a pair of blacked-out vehicles rapidly closing in on them from behind. "They found us," the driver muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Damn it," Caleb growled, slamming his fist against the dashboard. He turned to the driver. "We need to lose them. Get us out of here." Tara's pulse quickened as the reality of the situation sank in. The organization had already mobilized to chase them down, and they were closing in fast. They couldn't afford to lose the drive. It was their only shot at dismantling the conspiracy. The driver swerved sharply, taking a hard turn onto a side street, but the pursuing vehicles followed closely behind, relentless in their pursuit. The narrow streets of downtown Chicago became a battleground as the SUV weaved through traffic, trying to put distance between them and their attackers. But the blacked-out vehicles were faster, more agile, and they were gaining ground with every second. "Hang on," the driver shouted as he took another sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a parked car. Tara braced herself against the seat, her heart racing as the SUV skidded through the turn. Caleb was already on his comms, barking orders to the rest of the team to intercept and provide backup. Tara's mind raced. She knew they couldn't outrun the enemy forever. The pursuing vehicles were faster, and they had the advantage of knowing the city better. They had to come up with another plan, fast. "Caleb," Tara said, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her, "we need to split up. If they're after the drive, they'll follow me. You take the team and get out of here. I'll lead them away." Caleb's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you out of your mind? You're not going out there alone. That's suicide." Tara shook her head. "I'm not asking for permission. This is the only way. We can't lose the data. I'll buy you time to get away." For a brief moment, Caleb hesitated, torn between his instinct to protect her and the cold logic of her plan. He knew she was right, the drive was the priority. If the organization got their hands on it, everything they had worked for would be lost. "Fine," he growled, his face hardening. "But you better not do anything reckless. We'll find you." Tara gave him a tight smile, knowing that her chances of making it out of this unscathed were slim. But she didn't have time to think about that now. She had a job to do. The driver pulled into an alleyway, bringing the SUV to a sudden stop. The pursuing vehicles were close, too close. Tara grabbed the drive and slid out of the vehicle, darting into the shadows of the alley. Caleb and the rest of the team sped off in the opposite direction, their tires screeching as they disappeared into the night. Tara pressed herself against the brick wall of the alley, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the sound of the blacked-out vehicles approaching, their engines roaring as they closed in on her location. She knew they would find her soon. But that was the point. As the first vehicle screeched to a halt at the entrance to the alley, Tara took a deep breath and sprinted out of the shadows, her legs pumping as she ran down the narrow path. The second vehicle followed close behind, its headlights casting long shadows on the walls as it sped after her. Tara's mind raced as she ran, searching for an escape route. She knew these streets well, but the organization's operatives were trained and ruthless. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. And what they wanted was the drive. She reached the end of the alley and darted into a narrow side street, her heart hammering in her chest. The sound of the vehicles grew louder as they closed in on her, their headlights illuminating the path ahead. Tara knew she couldn't outrun them forever. She had to come up with a plan, and fast. As she rounded the corner, she spotted a construction site up ahead, the skeletal frame of a building still under development. Without hesitation, Tara sprinted toward it, weaving through the barricades and scaffolding as she made her way deeper into the site. The vehicles couldn't follow her here, at least not immediately. She had bought herself a few precious seconds. She ducked behind a stack of concrete blocks, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to catch her breath. Her mind raced, trying to come up with a way to outsmart the operatives that were surely on foot by now, closing in on her. The construction site was a maze of half-built walls, piles of materials, and heavy machinery. If she could lose them in here, she might have a chance. But she couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later, they would find her. And when they did, they wouldn't show any mercy. Tara glanced down at the drive in her hand, her heart sinking. She knew what she had to do. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and quickly initiated a secure connection to the team's remote servers. The data was too valuable to fall into the wrong hands, and if she couldn't make it out of this, she needed to make sure the drive did. She began transferring the files, her fingers trembling as she typed in the encryption codes. The sound of footsteps echoed through the construction site, and Tara's pulse quickened. They were close. Too close. The transfer was at 50%. Tara glanced around the corner of the concrete blocks, her breath catching in her throat as she spotted two figures moving toward her. They were armed, their faces hidden by black tactical masks. They moved with precision, sweeping the area as they searched for her. 70%. Pay! Tara ducked back behind the blocks, her heart racing. She needed more time. Just a few more seconds. The footsteps grew louder, and Tara could hear the operatives communicating in low voices. They were closing in on her position, methodically searching the site. She had nowhere to run. 90%. Tara's hands shook as she clutched the phone, willing the transfer to finish before they found her. She could hear their footsteps just a few feet away now, the soft crunch of gravel under their boots. 100%. Panink. The transfer completed just as one of the operatives rounded the corner, his weapon raised. Tara didn't hesitate. She smashed the phone against the concrete blocks, shattering it into pieces. The data was safe. But now she was out of options.
The operative spotted her and shouted to his partner, his weapon trained on her as he closed the distance. Tara's heart pounded in her chest as she backed up against the wall, her mind racing. She knew they wouldn't let her live.
But she wasn't going down without a fight. The cold, rough wall pressed against Tara's back as she stood frozen, the operative's weapon trained squarely on her chest. Her heart pounded in her ears, but her mind remained sharp, racing to figure out a way out of this. She had done her part. The data was safe, uploaded to the team's secure server, far beyond the reach of the organization now. But that didn't change the fact that she was still here, cornered with no visible escape. The second operative approached, his movements precise and calculated, each step echoing ominously in the hollow shell of the construction site. His mask obscured his face, but the cold, methodical way he held his weapon told her all she needed to know. They weren't here to capture her. They were here to finish this. Tara's mind raced. She needed to buy herself time. Just enough for Caleb and the team to find her. They had to be close by now, but if she didn't act, she knew she wouldn't make it out alive. "Don't shoot," Tara said quickly, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. Her voice was steady, though inside she was trembling. "The drive's gone. It's out of your reach now." The first operative, the one closest to her, hesitated for a brief moment. His head tilted slightly, as if considering her words. Tara could see the flicker of uncertainty in his stance. He wasn't expecting this. He wasn't expecting her to have already secured the data. "Check her," the second operative ordered, his voice muffled behind the mask. The first operative moved closer, his weapon still trained on her, as he reached out to grab her. Tara's pulse quickened as he approached, every instinct telling her to run, to fight, to do something. But she forced herself to stay calm, her hands still raised, her eyes never leaving his. As the operative reached for her, Tara's body tensed, ready to act. She knew this was her only chance. In a sudden, swift motion, she twisted to the side, grabbing the operative's arm and using his own momentum against him. She pulled hard, driving him off balance and sending him crashing into the stack of concrete blocks behind her. The second operative reacted instantly, raising his weapon to fire. But Tara was already moving, diving behind a pile of steel beams as the gunshot rang out, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. She hit the ground hard, the impact jarring her body, but she didn't stop. She scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she darted deeper into the construction site. Another shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off a nearby steel girder. Tara's heart raced, her lungs burning as she ran, her mind focused on one thing: survival. She had no weapons, no backup, just her wits and her will to survive. And she wasn't going to let them take her down without a fight. She could hear the operatives closing in behind her, their footsteps pounding against the gravel. They were relentless, methodical, and they had the advantage. But Tara had something they didn't: the knowledge that she had already won. The data was out of their reach, and no matter what happened to her, they couldn't stop what was coming. As she rounded a corner, her eyes scanned the site, searching for anything she could use to her advantage. Her gaze landed on a massive crane towering above the construction site, its steel arm extending high into the night sky. A plan began to form in her mind, and without hesitating, she sprinted toward the crane, her feet pounding against the ground. She could hear the operatives behind her, but she didn't stop. She reached the base of the crane and began to climb, her muscles protesting with every pull as she hauled herself up the ladder. The metal rungs were slick with moisture, and her hands slipped more than once, but she didn't let go. She couldn't. The operatives reached the base of the crane just as she was halfway up. They shouted at her to stop, their voices echoing in the still night air. But Tara didn't stop. She kept climbing, her body aching, her breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. She didn't look down. She couldn't afford to. Finally, she reached the top, pulling herself onto the narrow platform that jutted out from the crane's arm. The city stretched out below her, a sea of lights and shadows, but there was no time to admire the view. She turned, her eyes scanning the ground below. The operatives were climbing the ladder now, their dark figures silhouetted against the steel of the crane. Tara's heart raced, but she knew what she had to do. She couldn't fight them head-on, but she could outsmart them. She spotted the crane's control panel nearby, its switches and levers glinting faintly in the dim light. Without hesitating, she rushed over and flipped the main lever, sending a jolt of power surging through the crane's system. The crane arm began to move, slowly at first, but then gaining speed as it swung out over the construction site. The operatives were nearly at the top now, but Tara wasn't done. She pulled another lever, adjusting the angle of the arm, and then released the safety catch on the crane's massive hook. The heavy steel hook dropped down, its chain rattling loudly as it descended toward the ground. The operatives were nearly upon her now, their footsteps echoing on the metal platform. Tara could feel the vibration of their approach beneath her feet, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she grabbed the lever once more, swinging the crane arm in a wide arc. The operatives had just reached the top when the crane's hook slammed into the platform, knocking them both off balance. One of them managed to grab onto the railing, but the other wasn't so lucky. With a shout, he tumbled off the edge, his body disappearing into the shadows below. The remaining operative cursed, his grip on the railing slipping as the crane continued to move. Tara didn't stop. She swung the arm again, and this time the hook caught the railing, ripping it away from the platform. The operative's hands slipped, and with a final, desperate shout, he fell. Tara stood there, breathless, her body trembling from the effort. The platform was still swaying beneath her feet, the crane arm groaning as it slowed to a stop. She had done it. She had survived. But she wasn't safe yet. The sound of sirens in the distance caught her attention, and Tara looked out over the city. Backup was finally arriving. Caleb and the team had found her, and they were closing in fast. She climbed back down the crane, her body aching with exhaustion, but her mind clear. She had done what she came here to do. The data was safe, and the organization had lost their chance to stop her. As she reached the ground, Caleb and his team pulled up in their SUV, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Caleb jumped out, his face a mixture of relief and concern as he rushed over to her. "Tara," he called out, his voice tight with worry. "Are you all right?" Tara nodded, her legs shaking from the adrenaline. "I'm fine," she said, her voice hoarse. "It's over." Caleb reached her, his hand resting on her shoulder as he looked her over for any signs of injury. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice filled with pride. "You got the data." Tara took a deep breath, nodding. "Yeah, but they're not going to stop. Not after this." Caleb's expression hardened. "No," he agreed. "But now we're one step ahead." Tara looked out over the city, the weight of the night's events settling heavily on her shoulders. She had survived, but the fight was far from over. The organization would come back stronger, more determined than ever. But so would she. "We'll be ready for them," Tara said, her voice firm with resolve. "Whatever they throw at us next, we'll be ready." Caleb nodded, his hand squeezing her shoulder briefly before letting go. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice gentle. "You've earned a rest." Tara gave him a small, tired smile and climbed into the SUV. As they drove away, the city lights flickering in the distance, she knew that this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next.